You are listening to Meet the Thriller Author, the podcast where I interview writers of mysteries, thrillers, and suspense books. I am your host, Alan Peterson, and this is episode number 145. On today's podcast, you'll be meeting Minneapolis-based author and journalist and true crime expert William Swanson, who has written extensively over the past several decades on crime, law enforcement, and the courts. He's the author of 3 true crime books, one of which was the basis of a recent Investigation Discovery Network docudrama and is currently optioned for film. Now, under his pen name, W.A. Winter, he continues to bring high suspense to thriller fans with his April 20th release, The Secret Lives of Dentists. This is a great thriller novel that is inspired by the 1955 case of A. Arnold Axelrod, a Minneapolis dentist accused and tried for the murder of one of his young female patients. But before we get to the interview, I wanted to let you know about my Thrilling Reads mailing list. Go to thrillingreads.com/deals and sign up to receive my hand-picked recommendations on a great selection of discounted titles on all types of mystery and thriller books. Military, crime, espionage, political, police procedural, techno thrillers, cozy mysteries, and many more. I only email twice a month, so you won't get bombarded with daily emails or junk or anything like that. So go to thrillingreads.com/deals and sign up, and you'll be able to check out the great deals that I have lined up for everybody. All right, so here is my interview with W.A. Winter. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much. Good to be here.
Glad to have you here. And so you're a journalist. You've written true crime books. What led you to write a novel?
I have been a journalist, a working journalist, as we like to say, for 50 plus years. And during that time, I have always been interested in novels. I've been interested in fiction. I guess that's been my secret ambition, although not so secret. Several years ago, decades actually, I started writing in my spare time, writing mainly suspense stories and novels, and put them in a drawer, and frankly didn't see much future for them. Meantime, I'm working full time as a journalist. I'm writing a lot of magazine stories, and eventually I wrote 3, as you said, 3 nonfiction books, true crime books that were published here. Beginning in 2006, I thought, well, I'm gonna take some of these stories that I've been working on and see if I can expand them into working novels. So I took 3 of those manuscripts, and they became ebooks. They're available on Kindle and via Smashwords, if you're familiar with that. Mm-hmm. They're all set in Minneapolis or St. Paul. They're very dark. Noirish is probably Midwestern noir is how I think of them. No happy endings. They generally feature ordinary people who just get in a bind because of their own doing, because of their own dishonesty to themselves and to others, their rampant lust. My characters tend to be lustful types. Or because they're careless. They're careless people, and they get in trouble. So very ordinary in that sense, who are find themselves in extraordinary circumstances, sometimes deadly. After I wrote those 3, I had another idea. This was a new one, but it's based on an old story. In fact, it's probably the story that got me interested in crime writing in the first place. It involved a murder of a young woman and the eventual conviction of her dentist, of all people. This took place in 1955. It was a very, very big story in this part of the country. As a kid, I was 10 years old, and I remember lying on the living room rug reading, transfixed, the daily stories in the papers. And kind of odd stuff for a 10-year-old, but I was also interested in baseball, so it wasn't quite as perverse as it sounds, I guess. But anyway, this story has been in my mind for a long time, and after I wrote my other true crime books, I thought, well, I'm going to revisit the Axelrod story. The dentist's name was A. Arnold Axelrod, and maybe I would write a true crime story about that. But there were very few principals alive by this time for me to interview. I'd like to do that. There was also an odd scarcity of official documentation as the police files were kind of thinned out over the years. So I thought, well, what I want to do is write my own story, and so Secret Lives of Dentists is about a dentist, obviously. And the title comes from a terrific piece of journalism that ran in Harper's Magazine back in 1982 by a journalist named David Owen. And it's called The Secret Lives of Dentists. And it's one of those stories that just sticks with you for a long time. And it was nonfiction. It was about his research into the dental profession, which was rife with mental illness and depression and suicide. At least that for a time, dentists had the largest incidence of suicide of all the professions.
Yeah, I remember reading about that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I suppose Owens speculates that maybe having your hands in other people's mouths for 8 hours a day and be generally hated by your patients would put you in a dour state of mind. But anyway, I created this novel inspired by this case. I invented many more characters and changed all kinds of things and created new events. So the best I can say, it's inspired by that story. It certainly isn't based on it in the way that a lot of novels are based on factual events.
It must have felt a little liberating for you, though, to instead of writing true crime where you have to be so careful about the facts to be able to just kind of run with it. Was that did you enjoy that part of it?
Yeah, well, I enjoy writing. Everything I've written, as painful as it sometimes is, I really enjoyed it. There's really nothing I'd rather do and nothing I can do. I mean, I don't know what else to do. So yeah, the sense of inventing people, of playing God, something I've enjoyed doing since I was a small boy. I used to invent stories down my basement based on centered on a little town with an electric train set. And I would create these dramas just by myself. And what inspired me, I don't know, but I've always loved doing that. I love creating these characters who, honestly, I mean, it sounds corny. I hope my wife isn't listening, but they're more real to me in many cases than the real people I know. They're really flesh and blood. Maybe all fiction writers say that.
And so this book is set in the 1950s. Was that a challenge at all? Like getting the lingo right, the details, or have you written historical
fiction? A little
fiction?
bit. It's again, as a journalist, I've spent my career getting things right, at least getting things accurate. I do research for my fiction, not as extensively as with my nonfiction, but I've got old newspapers and I've got old magazines. Somebody handed me a Minneapolis Miller scorecard from 1955. Minneapolis Millers were the minor league team that preceded the Twins, if you're not a baseball fan. And yeah, sure, I do that. I have. If this were on video, you'd see a huge map behind me. It's a map of Minneapolis from the early 1950s. Oh. And I refer to that. And the idea is not to get everything accurate in a journalistic sense. It's to create a reality that is as much in my head as it is in any of the research materials that I've looked at. But there are a lot of names in here from the 50s in Minneapolis, a lot of place names, place sites. The neighborhood where this murder takes place is my neighborhood today. I didn't grow up here, but I've lived here for 40 plus years. This Linden Hills neighborhood in the southwest corner of the city, not known for its homicides, by the way, which made it an attractive place for me to stage this one. So yeah, it is liberating. That's a good word for it, and I've enjoyed that part of it, just as I've enjoyed the rigor of sticking to the facts when I've been writing my journalism.
There's a lot of great suspense and thriller books coming out of Minnesota. John Sanford, William Kent Kruger, Brian Freeman.
Yeah.
It's a great writing community over there, huh?
Well, I don't know if that, people say that, but I always think that's more of a Chamber of Commerce hype. I mean, doesn't every state have writers? I don't know if Minnesota has any claim on the majority, but yeah, we got, there's interesting stuff. And of course, we've got a long winter in which to hunker down and write these things.
Okay, so we got like the gist of The Secret Lives of Dentists, but can you tell us a little bit about the story and what it's about?
Yeah, I'm telling you about my story now, not the real story. keep that in mind. It's about a very attractive young woman named Terry Hickman. That's her married name. She's 21 years old. She comes to Minneapolis in the winter of 1954-55. And like a lot of young women at the time who streamed into Minneapolis from northern Minnesota and from the Dakotas and so forth, they're looking for jobs. They're looking for adventure. They're looking for love, not necessarily in that order. And they sometimes get into trouble. They sometimes they're easy prey for predators. They're easy prey for employers looking for cheap labor. They're all of those things. And Terry Hickman is no fool, but she really has a terrible craving for affection and for the pleasures of sex and companionship with good-looking men. And because she's so attractive and really very charismatic physically, she draws them like flies. And practically from the moment she steps off the Greyhound bus in Minneapolis, coincidentally, she is a married woman. Her husband is in the service in Germany at the time. She has a baby, presumably by this man, a 3-month-old child that she brings with her. After her murder, she is found to be 3 months pregnant. I'm sorry, her baby isn't 3 months. Her baby is a year and a half old. She's found to be 3 months pregnant. Mm-hmm. Anyway, her body is found along an abandoned trolley track in the Linden Hills neighborhood of Minneapolis. It is shortly afterward discovered that the last person to see her alive was probably her dentist. Her dentist, in my telling, is a middle-aged man named Rose. His last name is Rose, David Herschel Rose. And he's been a dentist for about 20 years. He's married and has a couple of teenage daughters. He's respected, not necessarily loved, but respected in the community. And he's developed this practice that serves women. He has a large practice serving women, and they're late afternoon, and he has evening hours for working women, and he's very, very successful with that. Well, Terry comes to live and stays with her older sister, who has moved to Minneapolis previously. And she complains shortly after her arrival, Terry does, of a dental pain, and she needs a relief from her toothache. And Grace, her sister, refers her to Dr. Rose, whose office is right around the corner from their apartment on 15th Street and Nicollet Avenue. Now under I-94, but in those days, a busy, if rather seedy part of town. She goes to the dentist and establishes a relationship with him that is more than just dental. In April, she goes to see him on a Friday night, and on a Saturday morning, her body is discovered by that abandoned trolley track. And that sets off the investigation, and that sets off the story. I don't know how much you want to hear about this. I don't know how much I want to tell you about it, Alan. But
yeah, you don't want to spoil don't give us any spoilers.
I don't. Yeah, I'm not gonna tell you how far this goes. But there is an extensive investigation. There are several characters. We're seeing this story. We're hearing from several points of view, including the two detectives who are assigned to the case, Anderson and Curry. They have their own issues. Anderson was a combat soldier in World War II and was involved in some rough stuff during the rescue of Bastogne, part of Patton's Third Army. And he's haunted by that. And he's also haunted bothered by an overactive libido, and that gets him into problems too. There's a young journalist from Rochester who's a reporter now for the United Press International. He gets involved, and there's a sinister character I refer to only until the very end of the book as the driver. And he's a cab driver. And he tends to be where things are happening. Today we would call him a stalker. He is cruising the city as a cab driver. I mean, he's a working cabbie. He's got a big family at home. But he's always got his eye out for the attractive women. And the book opens with him talking briefly with Terry Hickman, who is by then working at a Greasy Spoon not far from her apartment. The owners of the Greasy Spoon, it's a luncheonette. They're involved in the story, as well as a handful of young men who are somehow connected with Terry. They're drawn to her. They one is a photographer, and you can kind of figure out where that goes. But it's a multifaceted story from a lot of points of view, and it proceeds through the summer of 1955 with this very high-profile, sensational trial of the dentist that ends in a jury verdict that I won't discuss. Complicating the matter, and two of the things that I was very interested in was this sense of fear and loathing that people had, certainly back then, for dentists. That was just about the worst thing a kid could do, is go to the dentist. You got to go to the dentist. They'd do anything to avoid going to the dentist. It was just a scary place. They were not so good with their pain relief as they are today. And so there's just that basic fear and hatred of dentists that David Owen refers to in his magazine story. And then Dr. Rose happens to be Jewish. And Minneapolis at the time, certainly around World War II, had been described by journalists nationally as America's anti-Semitism capital. So I was very interested in the notion that how do the police, how does the public, how does the jury deal with a Jewish dentist accused of murdering this attractive young woman who was pregnant, by the way. That's really the dynamic of this, is that odd sense of coming to grips with a horrible crime, but also dealing with the background or the personality in the religion, in this case, of the accused. Minneapolis was heavily Lutheran and Catholic in those days, heavily Scandinavian and German. The Jewish population was there, but Jews really until, well, in the late 50s, early 60s, maybe even beyond, were discriminated against much the way blacks have been, in housing and in jobs. Jewish doctors had to form their own hospital in order to get operating privileges in the city of Minneapolis. According to some reports, they couldn't join the YMCA or any of the other service clubs. They had to form their own country club because they couldn't join a country club, an existing country club in the Twin Cities. It was really a shocking situation that I discovered. I wasn't aware of that. I didn't know any Jews growing up. None in my neighborhood. We were all Lutherans and Catholics and a couple of Baptists, and that was it. So, it was just kind of out of mind, out of sight. But to discover that there was this, this institutional bigotry was really shocking to me, even in my mid to old age. So that's part of the dynamic, and that's long story. Short, Alan, is the basis of this book.
Now, were you always a fan of growing up? Were you a fan of thrillers and mysteries? Were you a big reader of those genres?
Well, I was a huge reader of everything. My early heroes were Hemingway and Faulkner, and I minored in English at the University of Minnesota, and really deeply enamored of literature, serious literature of all kinds. I didn't read many thrillers, actually, until later on. And now I can say, my favorite writers are the great suspense or noir writers like George V. Higgins, Elmore Leonard, James Ellroy. These guys really, really knew how to write, and in Elroy's case, knows how to write. He's still alive. I have learned so much about the craft of writing from reading these people. They are just great writers, and like all great writers, they not only have an overwhelming sense of the sadness and the tragic part of life. They also have a rollicking sense of humor. Elmore Leonard makes me laugh out loud every time I read his stuff. And if you haven't read him or George V. Higgins, I really highly recommend them. But my interest in crime, as I say, comes from just this curious little kid. I loved to read Dick Tracy. That was the first comic strip I would turn to in the paper every day. I can't explain it beyond that, Alan. I grew up in a conservative home. I had, 4 older siblings. My dad was killed in a car accident when my mother was still pregnant with me, so there was no father there. And maybe that gave me a sense of an unspoken sense of things that can happen out of the blue and change change lives, probably not for the better. But I didn't grow up reading the suspense fiction so much as the crime journalism. That was really my entree into the genre, if we want to call it that.
Is that what led you to becoming a journalist too?
I think so. I think so. I as I say, I always like to read, and writing kind of came with that. My dad was an artist, and I had dreams of being an artist too. So as a kid, I didn't write so much as draw pictures. I drew every afternoon after school. I'd sit and draw pictures at the kitchen table. So, writing just kind of evolved into this whole storytelling thing. It was all about stories, I guess, of all kinds. And I really didn't start writing seriously for a serious audience until I was, I guess, at the University of Minnesota, and I decided to major in journalism. And I wrote in the Army. I was in the Army for 2 years, and I was an editor of a newspaper, and then one thing led to another as I got back here. Eventually, daily journalism, daily newspaper journalism, and wire service journalism, both of which I did for a while, gave way to long form journalism. And if there was a single book that was a determinant in my life, it was In Cold Blood. I was an undergraduate at the University of Minnesota, and I would sit in the J School library and read each successive installment of In Cold Blood that appeared in the New Yorker. I couldn't afford a subscription to the New Yorker, so I'd read it at the library, and I was just blown away by it. I was blown away by this merging of deep crime reporting, even though some of it later turned out to be incorrect, and this novelistic form of storytelling. I couldn't get it out of my head, and one of my journalism professors was equally excited about that, and encouraged me to follow that long form journalism, which then became very, very popular with Tom Wolfe and Gay Talese and all kinds of other great writers who appeared in Esquire, which in those days was really worth reading. It isn't now. In the New Yorker, those were the prime examples of the time. Harper's Atlantic also.
Yeah, there really has been a lot of change in journalism, though, the last 10, 15 years. Kind of a shame.
Well, yeah, it is. I'm still a big newspaper reader and magazine reader. That's where I get most of my information. But I know that they're probably going the way of the buggy whip. I hate to say. I hate to think that eventually everybody's going to be getting their news from the internet. No offense.
Yeah, no, it's kind of crazy when I see an article that seems interesting and I go to read it and it's just a bunch of embedded tweets. Mm-hmm. I'm like, really? This is the article?
I know it. There's something wonderful about print on paper. Not least the fact that you as a reader are controlling the flow. You can stop and yell at it and throw it across the room, or you can underline parts, or you can call up your brother and read parts of it. There's just, you're in control of the whole thing, and nothing really is intruding in that.
And so what is that for fiction writing? What's your writing process like? Do you outline these before you start writing, or do you write by the seat of your pants?
I like to have a plan. I've never been a good, I got in trouble in school because I never did my outlines correctly. They really seem too confining, but I always have a plan. And the plan might just be a page of bullet points. And then I will develop from that basic plan. I will develop a larger, more detailed plan, and I will start filling out my characters' personalities and their motivations and their jobs, etc. they will get names at some point. Sometimes they have names right away. I don't know why, but I'm really big on names. Names to me are extremely important, at least to me as I'm writing about these people. They really help me understand who the character is or who the character should be. So it's stuff like that. Things build, and then I sit down at some point. I just can't wait any longer. This story is ready to go, ready to come out. It's not ready to go, but it's ready to come out of my head, and I put it on paper. I write on a computer, of course, and then I revise a lot. I add things. The Secret Lives of Dennis had an entirely different ending from the one that we have. And I won't tell you that either. I don't want you to say, gee, you should have had that first ending. He made a big mistake there. So it's a process that takes a long time, and I'm usually doing something else besides. I believe in writing. I believe in writing as a job. Gay Talese always used to, maybe he still does, put on his three-piece bespoke suit and in the morning and go down to his writing room and sit there like he's dressed for downtown and do his work like that. There's something to the routine of getting ready for work in the morning, at least for my generation. I'll be 76 in a couple of years, and so there's just something about that getting up and going to work. During these COVID times, that's kind of all gone to hell, but that's the way I grew up, and that's I've always treasured that. So I'm usually at my desk by 8:30. I've read the paper, had my breakfast, walked the dog, and I will sit there from 9 o'clock until 5 o'clock at night with a lunch break, and just treat it very seriously with that routine and that discipline as a job, as a craft, I guess I would call it. And one odd thing in my case, for some reason, I am always most productive late in the afternoon, from about 2-3 o'clock on to quitting time. Most everybody I know say, "Oh, they're most inventive, they're most creative, they're most productive in the morning." Well, I'm not, even though I get up at 6 o'clock in the morning. But I really start cooking about 3 o'clock. So that's kind of when most of the work gets done.
Yes, like a slow boil.
Maybe that's what it is. Yeah, slow boil. That's a good way to put it.
So, what's next for you? What are you working on now? Well,
I've got another novel that I'm ready to show my publisher. The Secret Lives of Dennis will be published by an outfit in New York called 7th Street Books. They specialize in suspense fiction. And I have another suspense novel that's based on another sensational crime story from my checkered past. And this is about a crime family in Minneapolis, large dysfunctional family with a alcoholic hoodlum father and a neurasthenic mother, who get into some really terrible trouble and end up murdering a policeman and another man and eventually die themselves. This one is different because it's told by one of the criminal brothers, who survives after going down in this police shootout that kills his brothers. He somehow survives that, but he's in a wheelchair. He's been crippled by the police bullets. And years later, in fact, on the day he is dying himself, 38 years later, he recalls this whole family saga. And his name is Joe Lavoie. And the name of the book, at least for now, is My Name is Joe Lavoie. And he tells this story on the last day of his life. I think it's pretty damn good. We'll see if anybody else does. But well, it's similar. It's similar to this in that it's inspired by a case from my childhood.
Yeah, it sounds good. So yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Sign you up, huh?
Yeah, sign me up. All right, so The Secret Lives of Dentists will be published on April 20th. So check that out. It was real nice talking to you about your books and your process. Thanks for being on the podcast.
Oh, well, my pleasure, Alan. I certainly appreciate your interest.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, thank you. Thank you for listening to this episode of Meet the Thriller Author. If you have a moment, please do check out thrillingreads.com/links, where you'll be able to rate and review this podcast, or simply rate this podcast wherever it is that you're listening to it, be it Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Audible, Amazon Music, whichever podcast app you prefer. Please take a moment to rate this podcast. It's the best way to help other fans of mystery and thriller books to find the podcast, and it helps me get the word out, and so it's the best way to support the podcast. So I do appreciate that. And if you're interested, you can join my Thrilling Reads mailing list. You'll find the sign-up form at thrillingreads.com/links. Once you subscribe for free, you'll be notified about discounts and deals on great books in the mystery, thriller, and crime fiction genres. You'll also find my social media links and my author website over at thrillingreads.com/links. So check it out and say hi. All right, take care and stay safe until we meet again on the next episode of Meet the Thriller Author.